Great.
I do like to give particularly detailed notes when I do seminar stuff, because one thing that used to always frustrate me was when you had lecturers that gave you pathetically and you're like, but you do have a pen if you do want to take notes. So I want to just fly through some steps of the main steps that we're going through tonight, and I probably won't bring out everything in the notes, but feel free to have a read of them at home. And there will be some areas, mine's not coloured, but there will be some areas marked in blue. Hopefully, yep, there we go, some blue text. So blue text is sort of just some little, exercises, practical, some response time, I suppose. So what's the point of doing? The intro question to get the icebreaker sort of thing. I would say, how well do you handle conflict? Looking at that, it would be pretty much an average of 4.5 between us in the room, if you like. So that's actually encouraging, because the first step to handling it well is to be open and vulnerable and go, you know what, I don't actually handle it that well, I got a way to go. How well do we handle conflict in churches? That's interesting. I would say that would be an average, very much so, of, if you're lucky, 3.2. I'm just looking at it. It's interesting how people are like, I think I handled about 4.5, but then
collectively,
when we think about everyone else, collectively it's like, well, we're another 1.5 lower. It's just an interesting exercise. Obviously, we don't have a huge sample set.
Question: how do we handle conflict in the church, or how does the church handle conflict?
Yeah, fair enough. That was more like how do churches handle conflict. I probably should have worded that better.
No, that's what I read it as.
Okay, good. Yeah. So it's just, interesting. I like, if you've been to the Foundry before, you'll know that I like to introduce, to get us in the headspace, I like to introduce with a bit of a question and a sort of a quick summary. But the actual intro is, and I'll see as much as I can remember off the top of my head, when you look at the entire biblical narrative, what amazes me is the power of God is expressed in moments of conflict. It's extraordinary. And I mean, I'm talking big scale here. So the power of God expressed through the Word of God, activated by the Spirit of God, turns conflict and even chaos into creativity. That's right back in Genesis. So obviously you've got the chaos of pre-creation and God brings order to that. But of course it doesn't last very long, does it? Because you've got the fall by chapter 3. Yeah, we made it a long way. But here's the amazing, wonderful thing. Even the horror of the fall and the entrance of human sinfulness into creation, that kind of kickstarts this grand scheme of God's to redeem the lot of it. So God responds to sin, and obviously sin sets up conflict, and that conflict reverberates through everything, and it's shocking how wide and far-reaching that reverberation is. From the relationship between the genders, your desire, which is a different, that's an interesting word for desire in Hebrew. It's like a manipulative desire will be for your husband, and your husband will rule over you. So, manipulation on one side, tyranny on the other side. Work, Adam worked before the fall. He was always the gardener. I love how Mary thinks that Jesus is the gardener, like the second Adam. But the resurrection. Anyway, but now the ground's going to produce thorns, and so work then changes, and then of course and that's also a sign of creation is somehow broken. Even the soil that is there. So it's far-reaching. But what's so incredible is this conflict and the reverberation of it kickstarts this grand scheme of God, and it's a project of renewal, of new creation. And new creation is the existence of eternal intimacy with God that is made that much sweeter by the fact that it's not only perfect, just like it was, but that the perfection has been redeemed from brokenness. There's something even more beautiful about if nothing had ever gone wrong in the first place. If that makes sense. That's probably a bad way of saying that theologically, but...
No, but that's the way we see it when we experience it.
Yeah.
Comparing, aren't we?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to summarize the whole grand scheme of Scripture is that how much better would we deal with conflict if we really believe that conflict is an opportunity for new creativity? So the whole shtick of the peacemaker stuff, and I've got the book in the bibliography if you really want to go and read it. It's not too bad, but it's the peacemaker training, which we're not going to get into too deeply tonight, but that is on the basis that conflict is an opportunity in disguise. And it derives that statement from the story of Scripture. What happens when conflict between God and man or God and humanity happens? God sets about using it as an opportunity for redemption. And it's just a beautiful narrative. And so new creation communities, aka churches, should be communities that see conflict as opportunity. So if it's true that we're at about 3.1 or 3.2, then that tells me that we don't see conflict as opportunity. But it is. So that's the rationale for what we're doing tonight. You got a picture there on your notes. This is the diagram that comes out of the peacemaker training, and it basically summarizes the responses to conflict. Before we talk about conflict, it's important to talk about responses. And this summarizes all the possible responses we have to conflict, from kind of, not too bad to when it really ramps up. You've got the coloured version, so that's why I'm borrowing these extra set of notes. We're going to be focusing tonight on that central wedge. Obviously, the really negative extremes are escapism. So we were joking before about just ignoring it. Suicide is the ultimate form of ignoring reality. I say that carefully, probably not as carefully as I should, but we're not necessarily talking about the mental health aspects of suicide this evening. But there is a sense in which some people are driven to that level of ignoring reality. Just, I want to depart from reality, just because they cannot process it. The absolute opposite in the attack responses is, of course, murder. And hey presto, we're now at Genesis chapter 4. Like the whole year, what do we got? Conflict this time between two brothers. But we don't want to do murder, suicide, assault, litigation, flight, denial. We actually want to look at the centre line, or the centre wedge, if you like. I've drawn an imaginary line down the middle of that diagram, and that's because it splits those. So there's 6 responses summarised in that centre wedge, and you can sort of further divide that in half. Everything to the left is everything that we would call personal peacemaking. That's something you can do without mediation, so to speak, or without another party. This matters when we get to what I call relational triangles in a few moments. So overlook, reconciliation, negotiation. You can reconcile, you can negotiate. In fact, we're called to before anyone else is involved. And one of the reasons why I think it's important to think about this is because I think one of the reasons why gossip happens is we tend to tell someone before we negotiate, or we tell someone else before we reconcile, etc. By the way, I think negotiation is one of the most commonly important, that's one of the most used responses, because that's what we're going to be doing most of all, is actually going to the person and trying to negotiate a solution. So tonight we're actually finishing with negotiation, because that's what we need to do the most of, I think, usually in everyday life. Everything on the right-hand side is assisted peacemaking, mediation, arbitration, accountability. So that's when other people get involved. The point of the diagram is, so every person on staff at the church, and Jezza had it as well when he was here, we have this half wheel stuck up in front of our desks. So it's memorised. The only way to, if you like, do conflict well is to do the work, if you like, or the brain sweat when the heat's not on, and just memorise. Because you tend to act, your fight or flight responses, your subconscious responses, they will tend to act on what you've actually trained your brain to act on, memorise. Does anyone remember when I showed the backwards brain steering bicycle video on YouTube? Remember that? Yeah. So like after a while, if you memorise how to do so, you've trained yourself how to do so, it'll start to ingrain itself in. And so we've tried to memorise this half wheel so that we can respond better on the phone or whatever. But anyway, the visual tool, I like visuals. Visual tools give us a means by which we can, which by we can process the response that is necessary amidst the conflict. Having something visual and memorised kind of takes us out of the heat of the situation and reintroduces rational thinking in the moments that matter. The hard thing about conflict is the last thing we want to do is be rational. And that's why there's so much sort of brain training to force our own brain to be rational. I've got a little footnote there. Peacemaking is not the same as peacekeeping. There's a lot of peacekeeping that happens. The former, peacemaking, requires humility. Peacekeepers need weapons. So, you know, in the news, like peacekeepers, like in, I don't know, late 90s in the Serbian crisis in Bosnia, you had UN peacekeepers standing there with rifles. There's a lot of people protecting a lot of gates, trying to keep peace between people, and they're standing there with rifles. That's not peacemaking, that's peacekeeping. Peacemaking would prefer using threat to avoid conflict rather than allowing the conflict to happen, but in a guided, rational, mediated way. We'll move on.
It's a way of avoiding, I suppose, as well.
It is a way of avoiding, yeah. Peacekeeping is a way of conflict avoidance. So some quick Bible references for personal peacemaking. I've got the cheat sheet here, so because there's going to be Bible references coming thick and fast, but I just want to give you the scriptural basis for this. So, you know, overlooking an offence, Proverbs 19:11 says, "A man's wisdom gives him patience. It is to his glory to overlook an offence." That's the light stuff. Reconciliation, Matthew 5:23 to 24. These are really great Bible verses to have. This is what we have, by the way, stuck on our office windows or walls or whatever we've got it stuck. Matthew 5:23 to 24. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. Or there's also forgive as the Lord forgave you, Colossians 3:13. Negotiation, Philippians 2:4. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. That's a key text in negotiation. That is absolute vintage negotiation, what Paul's talking about there. Looking at the interests of others. How do we look at the interests of others? We'll come to that when we talk about principal bargaining agreements. Mediation, here's some quick Bible references. Matthew 18:16. If he will not listen to you, take one or two of the others along. That's, if your brother sins against you, etc. First, you can look these up when you get home and look at the texts surrounding it. 1 Corinthians 6:4. If you have disputes about such matters, appoint as judges even men of little account in the church. That's an interesting one. Again, have a look at the verses around that, please. Matthew 18:12. There's a lot of Matthew 18 stuff here. In general, we talk about Matthew 18 peacemaking. We did a staff meeting once on this with Devon Tracy. I talked about just Matthew 18 peacemaking. Matthew 18:12 to 17 this time. If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not go and look for the one that has wandered off? If he refuses to listen, tell him to the church. That's 12 and 17, sorry. Why is it doing that? Why is it jumping 12, 17? What's the deal with the sheep thing? The sheep thing is a sheep wandering off is a problem. It's a problem for the 99. I'm not going to go into why it is, because that's a whole bunch of first century shepherding context and how agrarian societies worked and so on and so forth, but it's a problem for the whole business. So part of taking the lead in conflict is actually saying to that wandering sheep, hey, your wandering is an issue for all of us. This is when you get to accountability, by the way. That's what we're talking about here. Something might not require that yet. And that's why it's jumping from the 12 to then 17, then we need to work as a team to keep a certain person accountable, because one wandering sheep can do damage. For example, if a predator picks up its trail and follows the scent back to the flock. So, yeah. The Bible references reveal that peacemaking, again, 3.2 thing, it should be considered the normal activity of church life. Peacemaking should be the normal activity of church life. My peace I leave with you, says Jesus. I do not give to you as the world gives. That is one of the most persistent ways that Satan destroys churches, is through assumptions amidst conflict. Feel free to underline that. Assumptions amidst conflict. Some of these assumptions include the strange idea that churches will sometimes never experience conflict. Or that when conflict occurs, the responses to it are completely up for grabs amongst varying opinions. No, there's actually biblical precedent for how we manage conflict. It's all there in the scriptures. And I think the Peacemaker is a great resource, because what the Peacemaker does, it's almost like if you kind of snipped up all the Bible verses about conflict and kind of threw it in the air as confetti, and they all landed in perfect order of how to kind of manage conflict, you'd have the Peacemaker resource. And then that resource is then summarised in that half wheel. That's why it's such a great resource. There are principles laid down in Scripture. There's more than one Bible verse that outlines each one, but they are there, and we just need to memorise. In the heat of the situation, hang on, is this getting through my Matthew 18 filter before I open my mouth? So on and so forth. I'm learning how to do that. We're all learning how to do this, but a good start is just memorising those responses. Does that make sense? Before we move on to relational triangles, does any of that not make sense? All cool with that so far? Go. Yeah. Great.
The only thing I wanted you to reword was...
Yep.
Can you reword, but that the perfection has been redeemed from brokenness? Can you change the word redeemed and say that in another way?
But that the perfection that we experience has been recreated from the brokenness.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the circumstance that you find yourself in,
yeah,
is because of the conflict.
There's a deeper relationship as a result of the conflict, and there's beauty in that. There's a deeper intimacy, because I'm talking here about the eternal intimacy with God.
Yeah.
So I've got 3 weddings this year, so I'm doing 3 different sets of pre-marriage counselling, and from a pre-marriage perspective, I talk with couples about the great thing about conflict is when you do it well and you work it out.
I think it takes you to a higher level.
Yes, exactly. The intimacy you feel with each other is deeper after you've kind of...
It's not resentment.
Not resentment.
It's not resentment.
Healthy. But in all seriousness...
It's not like something that's going to be scarred in your brain because you've said that and I'm going to remember it forever because I hurt my feelings.
But in all seriousness, a classic counselling trope is it'll get worse before it gets better. Because in order to get to that, oh man, we're good phase, you kind of have to... You kind of got to go mining underground for a little bit. That hurts. But if we stick it out, it's like gym analogy. It's like exercise. If you keep at it, all of a sudden it's like, I feel great, even though you feel horrible about to throw up, and when you really, it gets worse before it gets better. But when you pull out of it, the level of intimacy in the relationship is all the closer, because it's not just we're good, but we're still good even after that.
That's a good example. Jacob wrestling with God.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just thinking through it. Yeah, it probably is. I'm not sure Jacob's. My only thing is, I'm not sure Jacob really ever had a relationship. He was aware of God, but I don't think he ever had a real relationship with God. But before the wrestling. But maybe that's the point, is
That's
that
the conflict, yeah.
I think Jacob's relationship with God was merely transactional prior to that point. And it goes from being transactional to actually an actual relationship. It's not what God can do for me, it's well, actually, I love God. You know?
I went through this with my neighbour over the road, the one I actually led to Christ in the end. So we'd actually gone through that business where she was basically telling me to shut up. And I don't mean about God, I mean she just was very hostile towards me, you know, and I'm thinking, oh, now I've got this, I'm into this walking every day with her, how am I going to get out of this? So I hit the dungeon at that stage in my mind, you know, because I was thinking, I've got myself trapped here because I'm not very good at boundaries, you know, how do I stop seeing her? But in fact, because I carried on seeing her, and all I did, in fact, when I got home was pray about it and pray for her and pray for myself. We ended up, you know, I ended up leading her to Christ. Well, now she's like, you are the best friend I've ever had. Now, I'm not trying to pull close myself because it's Christ that's done this. If it had been me, I would have pulled out a long time ago. So you see, it actually brought her to, well, it softened her heart.
Yeah,
you know?
it's a great example.
So you might think at the time, hey, my boundaries are getting ruined here. I'm being trampled on. And I actually feel trapped. And I used to feel that constantly at work. But the fact that I'm taking it to God all the time, you know, and asking the Lord to make that change in me, and we keep doing instead of bailing out, then it's changed us both.
That your example actually leads beautifully in what we're about to talk about. You actually, in that context, you actually what we call self-differentiated. And if you want to know what that is, observe the triangle. Because that's, so we've got the triangle. Relational triangle, this is hilarious. This might sound confusing, but trust me, about 5 minutes in you'll go, oh, yeah, this happens all the time. So what is a
I
relation?
already know it happens.
Yeah, straight away. So
If
what?
not person C, D, E, F, G, and H.
Yes. Well, I was just going to say the only reason why it's not a relational triangle is some people feel like they're in a relational octagon. But basically, relational triangles are when person A has an issue with person B, but rather than do the Matthew 18, there we go, rather than doing the Matthew 18 work, they enlist the help of a person C to try and either arbitrate or in some context get rid of person B. Honestly, relational triangles are why reality TV makes money. When you turn on something like Married at First Sight and all the dramas or whatever that and yes, this is recorded on the internet, I'm looking at you, Channel 9, what people are tuning in to watch is the chaos created by relational triangulation. Back to a church, sorry, that's me being a bit of a rant. Back to a church context, if you're in a leadership position, well, let me put it another way. I hate talking in hierarchical terms, but let's call it this. The higher up you go in leadership, the more you will be identified as a person C. The more people will try to play you off against another person. It's funny, the Director of Ministries job is open at the moment for the Baptist Union, and no one wants it because one of the issues of being a denominational head is that there are, unfortunately, people play you against, whatever, so it gets nasty. But the way you break relational triangle, well, there's two options. You can break a relational triangle, or you can actually deliberately stay in it as a person C, even though relational triangulation is when you are enlisted without your consent. Okay. So someone says, you're going to, what is it, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that kind of thing. You know, you're going to be or you're going to help me gang up on over here.
Lots of, I'm right, aren't I?
Yep, that's a classic relational triangle statement. You know when people say stuff like, this is a classic one that I get, can I run this past you, blah, 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 blah. What do you think of that? But you can just feel in the tone of their voice that they are aching for approval in it. Yeah, and it's like, But, and this is the bit about the leadership side thing, you can actually choose to remain a person C, but in a self-differentiated way.
I had to do that at work.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah, and self-differentiation operates on the principle that Jesus modeled, and that is you can actually love people and disagree with them. And I love just the way, just watching Jesus with the disciples, and the classic one is with Peter. You know, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this truth, you know, you are the Christ, has not been revealed by men, but by my Father in heaven. You know, absolute, huge, massive compliment. What is it, 2 verses later, after he says, never, Lord, you shall not be crucified, or whatever he says, not on my watch, basically. What does he say? Get behind me, Satan. You know what I mean? Like, he loves Peter, but he's still going to say it. And he persists with him. We know that because he's down on the beach in John 21. Do you love me, Simon, son of Jonah? Do you love me? Do you love me? So he persists with his disciple. He loves them, but he doesn't just patsy to their stupid agendas. He actually says, no, sorry, you're wrong. And he knows when to say that, and he knows how to say that, but we're not Jesus. So it's a lot tougher for us, but sometimes I wish he got like automatic Jesus powers, which some people would argue is the Holy Spirit, but...
So if you think it, because you know it, then you can go back home and pray about it, and you're a better person the next day.
Yeah.
You have a face that person who's given it to you.
And prayer is the road to self-differentiation. The moment you feel you're being enlisted, it's taken me a while to learn this. I wish I'd learned this 10 years ago. The moment you feel like you're being enlisted as a person C, getting alone with God is the #1 priority. Lord, what do you think about this conflict? What do you think about the situation? That blue one there, is there a situation right now where you don't have to name names or anything, but is there a situation that you're going through right now where you feel like you are being enlisted as a person C against your will in a relational triangle?
No, but I could be, because my son's mother-in-law has moved closer.
Yeah.
So I've got
Families
to be
that are
very
rip
careful
up. Yeah.
what I say to her.
Yeah.
Because it'll all be about, oh, and what do you think about the grandchildren, you know?
Yeah. Mine's a family one too. Well, mine's an ongoing family one. I have a family member who basically pretty much hates my guts because I wouldn't cooperate in his campaign to slur my wife's parents. And so because I wouldn't cooperate,
Now you've got a target on your head.
because I wouldn't cooperate in that as a person C in that relational triangle with the conflict between A and B, there's now a question over whose family am I loyal to, and that'll be there. That won't be resolved because he's chosen for it to not be resolved. So sometimes this is what sucks. Sometimes you just have to live life under the shadow of some relational triangles, which sucks.
I certainly feel since not being a wiggle, but now being the music chairperson.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like I've put on a C badge.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, you have to wear the C badge now, and if anyone has a problem with anyone, it's your responsibility to deal with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, Elsa.
Yep.
I don't have to tell John anything. I just have to tell you, and then you'll sort it out because you're the chairperson.
Yeah.
It's more about taking sides, because what Satan does constantly is divide and conquer. So he wants to pull families down, he wants to pull churches down, and he wants to pull anything down that Christ is building up.
Yep. So relational triangles, ton of fun. Any present example, John, or you're just kind of mulling over it?
No, I can't think of any.
Yeah, that's
where
positive.
I'm a person C.
Yeah.
You don't
There
have
may
to
be, but I
you
can't
don't have
think
to
of
be in
any.
leadership to be a person.
No, you don't. No, not
I
at all.
actually wasn't in leadership, my
Yeah.
boss was.
Yeah.
But the thing is, to stand my ground, then you'd see me as that, because she was giving me, like, even if she complimented me, I would have done, get behind me, saying, because I don't believe you.
Yeah. So one.
But even it's almost seeming like being a person C is the definition of being a friend. Because if you're someone who is empathetic and compassionate, when you're a listener, you therefore become complicit because people want to come and tell you, oh, this really sucks and that person's really annoying me, and they want to give you all of their complaints.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife
And I want you
challenges.
to agree.
Yeah, my wife challenges me all the time. I got this self-differentiated response. So, sorry, what does it look like to deliberately go, okay, I'm stuck in this triangle, but I'm actually going to remain here, but with a mission now. I'm going to do some damage the other way, that is to the kingdom of darkness. Adopting self-differentiation. So what does self-differentiation looks like? I'm still going to love this person, but I can respectfully say, and here's an example response. Thank you for sharing that with me, but if that is that much of an issue, maybe it's a good idea to share it with person A. You know,
is that like I don't really want to get involved? Is that?
No, I think what you can say is you can actually say so let me back up a step. Let's say you're in your situation and let's say you are in a leadership situation. What you can do, and I think you've got credence because it's not you saying this, it's the Bible, right? You can say, well, doesn't it say that before we do this, before I get involved, that really the matter should be between you two first, you know? And I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, does the person know that that's an issue? In fact, I'm pretty sure I've heard you say that to someone.
I'm trying to get better at it.
I heard you say that once. I was like, God, yes, because there was something where it was like, you said, do they know? Like people think, you know, oh, this person, but do they know that? Like, has anyone actually said you sing out of tune or whatever? Like whatever it is, you know, because a lot of people just don't know because no one's actually had the courage to actually just gently go and tell them because we're so scared of what people.
Yeah.
I think we're scared that if we give honest feedback to people in an appropriate way, they'll collapse in a pile of broken Lego bricks on the ground, and that doesn't happen. If we say, you know what, I love you, I'm on your team, I'd love to see you flourish and grow and but maybe the next step would be to do but rather we just let conflict and people get frustrated. So directing the person B back to person A before getting involved is a great way of self-differentiating. So I'm happy to get involved on this condition.
Say that one again, directing person.
Yeah, directing the complainer against the subject of the complaint. Yeah. To engage, you know, before getting involved is a great way of self-differentiating as a friend.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd probably tend to diffuse the complaint before it. I decline to be the person C.
Person C, yeah.
And I generally person A, that's not really.
So if I came and told you that Lynn always makes my coffee too hot, and I'm sick of it, and I burnt myself last time.
I'd say that's not my problem.
That's a very male response.
That's a very stern way of directing A back to B.
I think I probably tend to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think
because I get problems like that at the menship.
Yeah.
And I just say, you're going to have to live with that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I just feel if I'm person C, I'm being manipulated, and I just say, no, I'm not doing it.
Okay. First of all,
I don't think and I'm not sure that that's helping to resolve the conflict, but I think that's the way I tend to act.
It's not so much whether it's helping or not. I want to say that, first of all, that's a legitimate response. And the reason why it's legitimate is because relational triangles, when you've been enlisted as a third party without your consent. Yeah. So it has to be, and this is super important, it has to be a free choice. No one should feel forced to be a person C if that's not their thing, right? So that's really important.
Even in leadership, when you're the head of accountability?
Well, then I would be saying that we've got to sort of ask the question about what is the role of leadership in this area. So I think there would be circumstances, like maybe from an eldership perspective, but then when it gets to that, then it's not a one person, then it's a board thing. So it's almost like person C's rather than rather than like one person isolated. Relational triangles work because they're isolating individuals and turning them into unwanted arbiters, or arbiters they don't want to be. It works. Satan will always work on isolation. So, you know, relational triangles are ways through which people are isolated by other people. So it's a perfectly legitimate response to say, I'm not going to be isolated in that way. The only risk though, so there's that. Having said that, The only risk though is that there are some people that will go, oh, no success there, I'm going to move on to the next one. So there is and this has got to be all free choice. This is really important. There is a free choice to go, do I just say, you know what, stuff it, I'm going to do a bit of cross carrying, and for the sake of this person, I'm going to lean into this one. Because you've got to pick and choose your battles. You cannot be like 50 different person C's. You've got to pick and choose your battles, and there may come a situation where you go, hang on, I've got to lean in on this one. I know I'm going to cop it, but whatever, and I'm going to deliberately apply principles of self-differentiation. What I'll probably do is I'll probably put a full stop on that and direct you to the resource, Jack Shitama, because there's another 90 pages of that. Like, as I said, we're sort of doing a high altitude flyover tonight, but yeah. I think definitely from a pastoral perspective, yeah, there's times when it's just, I've just got to like stuff it. It's going to cost me, but I've just got to do it for the sake of, you know.
Because it's quite often it's difficult to discuss an issue with person B when you're the person C, because you'd be trying to discuss it without necessarily exposing person A. But then quite often you've not been in any way involved in what the conflict is, so how do you know about it? Unless, you know, that's what I've found before.
Jack Shitama does cover some of that, So, relational, and do you know what? He's not the only one to talk about relational triangles. This is a very Googleable thing, so I recommend Googling relationship triangles and self-differentiation. There's a heap out there on it.
Apart from the first 10 hits of maths.
So, I'm just going to quickly fly through response filter flowchart. On page, whatever that is, 0.5 anyway. I didn't number the pages. What if you find yourself in the situation of a person B where someone is coming at you with a grievance that threatens to blow up into conflict? Returning to the peacemaker principles, we can't control the causes of conflict. So the reason why I wanted to do relational triangles is because I wanted to talk about what happens when we're forced into arbitrate, but now we're getting back to, now I've just got a conflict with another person, right? So from now on, it's just me against you, conflict, so to speak. I just wanted to have a look at a response filter flowchart before we actually get into principal bargaining agreements, because that's when we get into resolution. We've got to figure out, this isn't a book now, this is something that I'd like to game out, because this is something that I had to come up with. I came up with this after having a pretty full-on catch-up at the picnic table at Avalon Beach. And I had my notebook with me, and I just sat there looking at the ocean and reflected, and I started scribbling this and drawing arrows and whatever, and the more I thought about it, the more I think this might actually be something. So feel free to chuck it out, because this is homegrown. This is not any professional about me. I think we've got to figure out what's objective or subjective in conflict. I feel that because this is what's not talked about in a lot of conflict resources that I've come across. There is not very much on what is objective and subjective. I'll explain what I mean as we go. The diagram below is a thought flow of the internal conversation we need to have with ourselves in order to correctly apply Jesus' instruction to remove our own plank. 7:3-5. By plank, Jesus is not simply referring to our own moral failures. I mean, there is that. He who is without sin cast the first stone. But also to the cultural, generational, and communal lens through which we interpret people's words to us. At some stage, the churches are going to have to figure out that the lenses through which we interpret stuff matter big time. We'll come back to some of this when we get to how to read the Bible in season 2. But anyway, and when it comes to conflict anyway, I think one of the crucial lenses we need to be aware of is objective versus subjective. I'll try and do an example of this in a second. So before I allow myself to comment on the subjective, is their objective claim correct? In other words, Alicia comes to me and she says, "You broke my mug." That's an objective statement. Did I or did I not break her mug? Okay. Yes, I broke her mug. If that's the case, then the expectations between us need to be clarified. is it my responsibility to not break her mug? I mean, I know this is a ridiculous
Or
one.
tell her when you broke.
Or tell her straight away or whatever. You know, what is she expecting of me when that actually happens? Okay? Now, once we've figured out that there are some expectations that need to be clarified, we can then work together to clarify those expectations. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that it was my job to tell you straight away when I broke that mug. Or, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that that was such a big deal, or whatever. I know the broken mugs are dumb. I try to simplify the example. What? No. Okay, so now I'm being accused of something I didn't do. You broke my mug. Is that objectively true? No. Then the conflict lies somewhere between tone and interpretation. What I mean by that is, in pre-marriage stuff, I talk about people are not upset at what has happened. They're upset at what is, people are not upset at what happens. People are upset about what they feel is happening. Example, someone is not upset that you didn't hear them. They are upset because they feel you never listen. Can you pick the difference there, especially if you're also on your phone at the same time? You know, what they feel is happening is the idea of a pattern of behaviour. You never listen. You're always on your phone. You've just said, what? I didn't hear you.
Well, you're not listening because you don't care.
Exactly.
It's the assumption
Exactly.
of what that behaviour means.
Assumptions grow out of what people feel is happening, and they connect events of behaviour in a long row. That's a tough one because we've all got behavioural issues. Because we've all got habits. I've got bad behavioural issues that need work. Everyone does. And so when you connect stuff in a long dot, that's. So people get frustrated, not necessarily at what has actually happened, but what they feel is happening. Getting back to the mug example, you don't care about my stuff. You know, it's like there's a worry that there's carelessness happening in the household. You don't respect my property, etc.
So therefore you don't respect me.
So therefore you don't respect me.
You don't care what I like.
Yeah. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because that will come out in their tone and their pitch and their volume, and meanwhile, if Alicia goes, you broke my mug, I am if I haven't broken it, here, listen to this, I can very easily interpret that as, she always blames me. You know, it's never the dog has possibly knocked it over, it's never Josh, because it's never Josh, of course. You know, she always blames me. She always blames me. I'm interpreting her tone and her pitch as like constant. All right. So what happens?
She'll say, "You always blame Josh."
You always blame Josh. Exactly. So before I go, I didn't break your mug. I got to go. Hang on. I've got to really commit to hear each other's stories. What is the narrative behind her assumption that I'm careless, or I don't, or whatever? Bring the mug. You know, that I'm careless. What I'm getting to here is I believe correct interpretation is a byproduct of knowing each other's stories. The more we sit down and really listen to each other's background, the better that we can actually interpret what people are saying. And that is why that flow chart is it objective? Yes, it's objectively true. We need to clarify some expectations here. Is it a subjective issue? We need to hear each other's stories. Because then we can interpret each other differently. This isn't watertight. I'm still in process with this, developing it out. But your turn to talk. Can you think of a circumstance in your life where you've experienced a certain critique or accusation where you needed, to filter through the above flow chart before responding?
4 million.
Yeah.
4 million. Well, now you've got it. Now you can photocopy it and give it to John.
Well, we literally could coming to a conflict thing tonight. When I was making tea, I was already thinking, right, well, if I'm feeling something, I need to say it, getting good practice. So John was talking about how he needed to pick up a team shirt at volleyball and another shirt from someone else. And so I said, oh, another shirt? He heard, well, why are you getting another shirt? Are you bringing more crap into the house?
Yes.
I knew John had a shirt, Ollie's got a shirt, Kayla's got a shirt. Who's this other shirt for? I wanted clarification, like, because the story to me wasn't really making sense.
Yeah.
And so then he snapped a response back because he heard me going, bringing more crap into the house.
Yeah.
And so his response to me about, another shirt, he goes, well, it's for so-and-so, in that tone. And I was like, whoa, am I not allowed to ask questions? Do I just need to shut up and hurry up and make dinner?
Yes.
You know, it's just, am I not allowed to speak in my own house?
Yeah.
So do you know, and so I was just fuming on the inside, quiet, because we hadn't discussed the assumption. And then I said, I'm so hurt that I asked what I thought was a simple question, and then he told me what he heard.
Yeah.
But still, my other immediate example was in terms of knowing each other's stories, knowing that when they're on their phones in the front room, they're quite often playing XYZ game that has 3 to 5 minute rounds. So when I've said dinner's ready and I'm sitting at the table by myself,
tapping your fingers,
eating, because I'm like, screw you guys.
Yeah, I'm hungry.
They're not just having a couple more scrolls because they don't care. They're just going to finish that one game because that's the way that computer app works, and the games are only 3 minutes. So because 2 minutes is a really long time when you've said I've made your dinner, and when your love language is acts of service. So I'm sitting at the table alone and unloved and unappreciated while they ignore me on their phones. But knowing that's a game that they play, and they may have just pressed start on a new game, and so they're going to be 3 minutes and they have heard me. Makes all the difference.
Yeah. That's massive.
Or I burn all the phones.
Or you throw the dinner out.
You could just throw the dinner out. I was just thinking.
I'm a conflict avoider and a peacemaker and a doormat.
I can't take the bull by the horns either. I'm not like that.
I can laugh my head off. I have no domestic conflict.
You lucky
Yeah,
man.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
Well,
I have a well.
The only thing is when I'm sitting out in the driveway for 5 minutes waiting, and thinking, you knew what time church started before you ever got up this morning.
Yeah.
But we just do it. It's all right.
Yeah. I had 20 years of conflict. That ended that relationship. It was all under the carpet.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it?
Because I didn't
Thanks for
actually want
sharing
to
that. It's
argue,
vulnerable. Yeah.
and I actually just let it build up. And in the meantime, we're not taking care of the relationship, let alone each other. And so it falls apart.
Just bouncing off, sorry, I was just going to say, just bouncing off what you're saying, Gail, the last underlined phrase of this section before we move on to principal bargaining agreements is the problem we face so often is that further resolution to conflict demands greater vulnerability in the exact moment where we least want to be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And we were both the same in that respect, so we never actually touched on the subjects that we needed to touch on. We would talk about every other controversial subject under the sun. We were very good at it because we're both, educated. But dare not touch our own relationship. Wow. It became more and more fragile. And I lived on, the next 15 years of assumption. And when I say to the children now, I don't know what your dad thinks. I actually don't know what he thinks. I know what his opinion is on a vaccine. I know what his opinion is on any political issue because we had all those conversations. But even if I thought to myself, right, I'm going to ask him. It's the best way, isn't it? Got to do this. Ask. He wouldn't answer. No. Never got an answer from him. Just couldn't express it, He couldn't. Yeah, it's very hard.
I feel the need to say I'm sorry for your loss. Because there's a grief.
Oh, there was. And I suppose, to yeah, I mean, I've been now on my own for 21 years, so, you know, I think God's sort of doing his work in me so that I don't fall into that same trap again. But, you know, as far as people paying attention to you and you paying attention to them, what has gone on in your first 21 years counts for a lot of shaping on you.
Yep.
And so, you know, I think I've worked, as I just said, 21 years, 21 years, 21 years.
Wow.
You know, we're up to that. And I'm saying, Lord, I'm still ready. Still ready for the next
Time
one.
for a new phase.
You're in a bit of a Moses position.
I've been
Been prepped for a while here.
I know. What's wrong? Isn't he ready yet?
Yeah.
Can't I do the rest of my practice with him? I
Yeah.
can wear the L plates,
Yeah.
please.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's deep.
I did a lot of work, you know, forgiving,
Yeah.
and that's why me and him can be friends now, and that's how the kids, you know, have healed after this breakdown. And it was when I came into the kingdom proper, when Rick left. God couldn't touch me because Rick was my God. And then as soon as Rick shut the door, God came in. I mean, that's how faithful he was to me.
Wow.
And after that, a year later, then I got my Holy Spirit experience. And then I said to the Lord, so what is the role of a woman as a wife and the role of a man as a husband? And so it took me back to the garden.
And recreation. Yeah, so we'll periscope up from that because that's appropriately deep. But think about just how much more effective would we be in a church context, if just on a Sunday morning and all the conversations that happen, that we just kind of have this filter of, is this objective or is it subjective, and following some of those steps. We do need to actually get to resolution. I wanted to get to this before 8:30, and we're still on track, but only just. Okay, so let's get to actual sort of conflict resolution. Positional versus principled resolutions. In the final section, let's just assume you've chosen to negotiate a resolution to the conflict in line with Christ's commands. So A's gone to B, etc. You haven't enlisted a C. You've resisted the urge to, as I said, enlist an innocent bystander into a relational triangle. You've clarified that the point of contention is not merely your interpretation, but it is actually an objective difference of an opinion on something that is important to the other party. You've ticked all those boxes. Okay, the question remains, how are we going to negotiate? We've got to negotiate something here. And more often than not, yes, okay, I get it. Sometimes in life you got some of those other things on the wedge, but 99% of all the conflict that we go through, it's got to be, we're going to have to negotiate with people. That's life. So getting to yes is one of the top selling, it's not a Christian book, but it is one of the top selling business books in all of history for the last, 30 years. Sorry, when I say all of history, like in terms of its numbers of sales. So Harvard Business School, I don't know if you've heard of it, but Harvard Business School is a department of Harvard University, one of the top universities in the world. There is an entire subsection of the Harvard Business School called the Harvard Negotiation Project. And they teach, their entire curriculum is basically taught out of this book. It's in its 4th or 5th edition. As I said, it's in the bibliography. The basic thesis of the book is what they call the difference between moving from a positional bargaining agreement to a principled bargaining agreement. So let me give you a quick example of positional bargaining agreement. So you've got person A, over here, and person B, and I like to use the example of this person wants to pay $10, but this person wants to pay $20, and
wants to receive $20?
yeah, like it's a car boot sale.
Right.
So the price on this is $20. Yeah, Gumtree. This is Gumtree, and this is I'm only going to give you 10. You know what I mean? And they're like, well, no, that's ridiculous, but I'll take 18. And they're like, well, how about 12? So they're shifting their position closer to the inevitable $15 midpoint. You know what I mean? Yeah. And what happens is that yes, they get the sale and they shake hands, but both of them had to compromise their position. And yes, compromise is not a dirty word. I think maybe we should compromise a bit more, to be honest, but that's why the Apostles' Creed, that's why the Apostles' Creed exists, to figure out what we compromise on and what we don't. But having said that, that's positional bargaining agreement. That's how we naturally work.
Yeah.
We will look at each other and we will go, I'm getting okay, you think that, I think this, and let's, we gradually edge closer to some midpoint. The problem is that
no one gets what they want.
The relational flow of this is always going to be like, it's a ping pong match or tennis match. We need to change the direction of the relational flow. What does that mean? Well, it means this. There is another way, moving towards principal bargaining agreements. The approach challenges both parties to actually step back from the item altogether and identify a common principle. Now, look, when you're bartering over the price of something, probably principal bargaining agreements. Don't stretch the analogy too far, but we're talking about big stuff now. Principal bargaining agreements. We need to find the common principle. I've sat in front of a lady who was talking to me about some relationship issues 3 weeks ago, and all of it was like, but when the kids come home, he's doing this, and then we get into a fight and da-da-da-da. And I said to her straight, I said, do you both care about the mental and emotional health of your kids? And she nearly cried, but it was like, yes. I'm like, that's our starting point. That is the big principle that they both care about. The emotional and mental health of these kids, like welcome to adulthood. The mental and emotional health of these kids is top priority. And who's going to disagree with that? Like, what kind of monster? Nah, screw that. Like, you know what I mean? So that was it. So that was the big principle. And then I was like, cool. I'm happy to sit with you guys and brainstorm at a table creative solutions to meet that principle. Can you see the difference in the relational flow? All of a sudden, it becomes this person that now we're standing together, united, we're carrying, it's like when you've got like a basket and each person's carrying a handle each. And we unite the table, the issues on the table, and we're united in brainstorming practical solutions. How do we apply what we both hold in common? That is a principal bargaining agreement.
That's the way I helped my daughter solve her conflict with her ex, because the Lord had helped me get over, our separation, and
Yeah.
was able to help her.
Yeah.
And this her standing on those principles without mentioning God.
Yeah.
Then that meant that he would eventually make a change too. And he did.
Yeah. So and again, some of the pre-marriage stuff I do, communication comes up, So, can we both agree that communication is important to a marriage? Everyone's like, well, usually. Yes. Okay, great. Now let's brainstorm solutions we both agree to. Oh, let's do phone curfews.
Would you say that marriage could become the principle that they both agree on?
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. Yeah, I think did I write it there?
Children,
That our marriage matters or something like that. But yeah, I think I used that one when we were talking with, like I said, I'm working with 3 different couples at the moment. We were doing the session on forgiveness, and I talked about how forgiveness has to have a basis. And I asked them, what's the basis for forgiveness in a marriage? And they're like, our marriage matters. I'm like, cool, let's go with it. That's, if nothing else, forgive each other because your marriage matters to each other. Like, it's that simple sometimes. Yeah, we talked about God as well, don't worry. But anyway, okay, that's fine. Let's bring it to church. Here we go. This gets fun. Some big principles. What are the big principles in church? Well, look, there's a few, right? But this is off the top of my head. The reverence for God in our worship. Who's going to disagree with that? See, now it becomes how we're going to work together to make sure God is glorified. The correct handling of Scripture. Who disagrees with that? It is important that we are handling Scripture correctly. All right, how are we going to do that? How are we going to ensure that we are not just doing that, but crucially, we are training people to do that in their own lives? That's one of the reasons why we're doing How to Read the Bible in the next Foundry session. But the point is you get me. Responding to the Great Commission. Who's going to disagree with that? Nah, that's not important. No, that's a big thing. Okay, cool. So how do we work together to brainstorm ways to apply fulfilling the Great Commission, etc.? There's more big principles. I was actually thinking about worship and other stuff as well, but I didn't want to just go on and on. We all agree, returning to the big principles, this is why the Apostles' Creed, stuff like that matters in church history. The big principles we all agree on turns former combatants into co-workers. Feel free to underline that. Uniting in a commitment to honour the big principle in practical ways. One of the issues with church culture, Dale Stevenson said it. He said it differently. He said Baptist culture is anti-entrepreneurial. I nuanced that. I'd say it this way. The problem with church culture is it's often anti-creative. We tend to, because churches are usually speaking high tradition atmospheres, with big, nothing wrong with that, heritage is great, it's important, whatever, but churches tend to be high tradition atmospheres. It tends to suffocate creative people. There's not many...
Oh, like get with the program or go somewhere else?
How many entrepreneurs and artists attend your local church? Not that many. Not that many in comparison to how many accountants and authors and engineers and attend churches. Creativity is a lost art. Churches need to enlist creatives. That's why I love what Fran says. Creative people are the lifeblood of the church because they are thinking what no one else is. Mm-hmm. And it's like they are the ones that lead those brainstorming sessions. It's hilarious. No, it's not hilarious. That's the wrong word. It's wonderful, actually. Even just like, I'm looking at Francine's idea of the planning party. We're not going to do a committee. We're going to invite everyone. And just even renaming a meeting to planning party, I never thought about maybe we should rename Ella's meetings to planning parties. But it's just a term that just shifts the way you think about it. Like I probably would go to a planning party before I would go to a meeting. It's just a creative way of renaming it, whatever. But creativity.
I'll bring the chocolate, you bring the tea.
Yeah. Think of sorry, that's meant to be an A, not an I.
Either of them, actually.
Before we get to the conclusion, think of a point of conflict in your workplace, in your church, because I was thinking there might be people from other churches here, or your ministry right now. Ask the question, what is really at issue here? Because at some point you're going to be saying, yeah, that's fine, Pete, but how do I get to the big principle? The way you arrive at a big principle is by asking the question, what's really at issue here? What's really at issue here? A few minutes after reflecting on this question will reveal the deeper principle. Once you have the big principle, ask your team, let's brainstorm creative ways to apply this, or to, not do this, or do this, or whatever, What is really at issue here is a really important question. I'm constantly asking that. Just standing back, what's really at issue here? You're either in conflict or you're on mission. And unity is a byproduct of mission. And not just, and I don't just mean that in a church, I'm talking about even even marriage, Alicia and I, we're on a mission. Like our marriage is not just the fact that we're mates and we love each other and whatever, but actually we're on a mission. We actually believe in the same things. And unity is a byproduct of that. If you've got a really good friend, even someone you collab with to start a volleyball team, your mission is to create a really cool volleyball team. I'm not going to poo-poo that. That's important. People need spaces for friendship and fun. Unity is a byproduct of mission. Let's do something together.
Yeah, you just struck something, just resounded something in me, because I think the reason I had a lot of conflict with the manager while I was working was because she could see that I was on a mission. That I wasn't going to leave on her terms. I was going to be leaving, when I was told to by the master. Not her. And she didn't like it, because there was a unity inferred in that.
Yeah.
That she wanted to be head and we had to be the robots.
There's a beautiful story in Scripture where Jesus asks what's at issue does a principled bargaining and debugs a relational triangle and pretty much everything in these notes in one hit with one statement. And it's the woman caught in adultery. It's one of my favourite stories. I mean, who doesn't love it? But I love this thing. So like all the experts are like, we got you now. Doesn't it say in the law, in the Torah, that, you know, thou shalt not commit adultery, and obviously the aforementioned, you know, penalties for such, like stoning. And they're like, we've got him. And Jesus is, well, I love Jesus. Well, I love Jesus for a couple of reasons, but I love his genius. Oh, perfect response. He who is without sin cast the first stone. Okay, yeah, it's great, but why is it great? Here's why it's great. What they're saying is actually this. Does it not say in the law, you know, thou shalt not commit adultery? They're not actually saying that. That's what's coming out of their mouths, but they'd be far more accurate to say, doesn't it say in this part of the law, or in this particular verse? Jesus' response, he whom is without sin, let him cast the first stone. What does that force them to do in their brain? Flick through the whole law. Doesn't it? And so they're like, we got him on this one, you know, on the one footnote in this dusty corner of the Torah here. Well, it's not a dusty corner, it's Exodus 18. But anyway, you know, we got him on this one, on this technicality, so to speak, and Jesus says, cool, you got me. So guess what I'm going to do?
But check.
Throw the other nine at you.
I'm going to force you to import the rest of it into your head. And what does it say? And they slowly walked away, beginning with the oldest to the youngest. Because the oldest are usually more humble, but they're also the ones that have done more stuff. Yeah, exactly.
And the youngest are black and white, and the youngest are the ones who want justice.
Yeah. But what's the genius of that response?
Indication.
The genius of it is Jesus going, you want a principle? You want a principle? Let's talk about the whole law. Off they go, and he immediately, completely self-differentiates in that moment and busts up a triangle.
His concept of the whole law is summed up in 2 commandments.
Exactly.
Love your God and love your neighbour.
It's beautiful. You know, so yeah, exactly, yeah. So that is one of my favourite texts, because the genius of Jesus in the way that he goes, yeah, the Bible does say in this bit, but context, dudes. What does the rest of it say? Go and have a look yourselves. Anyway, so
Do you want an example, or do you want to move on?
go for it.
Well,
I need to shut up.
I would. Oh no,
Yeah.
just with your blue section. So some of the conflict that is in my ministry area, not mentioning the conflict specifically, but what I think it boils down to is a fear or a belief that if the music's bad, no one will want to stay at Waratah and we'll get no new people. So I think that we get layers of conflict when something
Layers of pressure.
something isn't right, or if something's clunky. When you boil that right down, I believe that's what's sitting at the bottom of that is a real desire for Waratah to be a desirable place to worship, and that for that to be the case, the music's got to be good.
Go deeper.
Yes.
Go
Okay.
deeper. Keep pushing it. What's underneath that? What
Fear.
Yeah. So what is underneath the fear that if we aren't a certain standard, people will check out? What's underneath that?
You were talking about.
There won't be a church here. No, go somewhere else.
Go
Be yourself.
segue.
Be yourself.
I think John probably knows what I'm aiming at here.
Well, I go.
Well,
deeper.
you go.
I
for it,
go
John.
deeper and
Yeah.
say,
Oh.
because I've had the same thing, but not with regard to music.
Yeah.
But I go deeper and say, what is it that's most important to you at Waratah? And they'll usually come up with, it's the belonging, it's the fellowship. And I say, yeah, the fellowship. Stick with it.
Are you feeling too much responsibility and the accountability for it all? Because you've just taken it on. It could be that.
No, I fear that is where, that's where the conflict, some people pushed back to me, I feel that that's where the root is. But then I suppose if we're trying to go deeper than that, is the root in it's in my power whether people come to.
Here's where I would be going. I would be going, what would Jesus be looking at if he walked in that door on a Sunday morning? And I know that's the most cliched thing for pastors to say in the world, but cliches exist for a reason, right? Because they're usually right over a given period of time.
He'd be saying, "Hi brother, are you here?"
Yeah.
Looking for the Spirit.
That's the one. I think that we are infected, because we're sort of a post-Enlightenment age church, we do still have that baggage of humanism. In other words...
Slick 90s.
Yeah.
Slick.
Yeah, it's like if we're not in our skinny jeans and cons and whatever, like...
Yeah.
I'm a culprit cons. But it's like we put too much stock on the power of human beings to screw up God's plans.
That's what I was coming to.
That's humanism.
It's where we need to hang on to this, and there's a problem for us to solve.
Yeah. So what's really at issue is, do people really believe that God is bigger than our mistakes or otherwise? Because if they don't, things will never improve. The reason why things will never improve is because it's really hard to do excellence when you're constantly nervous about screwing up. Do you know what I mean? But what's amazing is how when people feel free, like when people feel that freedom of, I'm just going to use it, of David dancing in the presence of the Lord, when people feel free, that is when they, ironically, that is when they improve out of sight. Because all of their mental energy is devoted to doing a great job. Not because of fear of punishment, but because of who God is. Let me give you an example. When I was in school, I put effort. This is the thing. Our relationship with God is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. Dallas Willard, there's a free Dallas Willard quote. Grace is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. It's not opposed to effort. When I was in school, I ran faster at the faction carnivals where I knew my mum and dad were watching. Do you know what I mean? When you're a little kid and you're running, and then you're 30 metres away from the finish line, and you sit and there's mum.
Crying, usually.
Yeah.
My
mum didn't cry, she's ice. But, sorry, but I love her. But she's, and like 30 metres, but there's mum, smiling. And what I want to do,
yeah.
Put more effort in. Not because I'm scared that if I come 5th or 4th or whatever, they're going to be like,
she's going to care.
But because it's like, mum's here. Like, how our worship change if we were all like, our Saviour's here, watching us, applauding us at the finish line. He's not going to go if we don't get it. He's going to be like, I am pleased with your worship. That's, you see what I mean? That makes me put in effort to do what I do, because it's like, it's the good and faithful servant thing. That's not just at the end of all. You can experience that in prayer daily if you really pursue God. I mean, don't we sing about it? I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think. I mean, we sing this stuff, but you tell me that you're pleased. But I stand there singing that song sometimes at work. I wonder how many people believe that. But that makes me put in more effort, and people improve when they're free from failure. The humanism puts the weight of failure on us. Yeah. Sorry, but I think that's where I'll be going with that. Yeah.
I think it the same.
And so then the common principle is
God is pleased with us because He seeks let's ask the question straight at the Bible. Who is it that the Father seeks as worshippers? Those who worship in skill and skinny jeans. Spirit and in truth. Yeah, He seeks those who worship with smoke machines and LEDs. No, it doesn't sound right, does it? Spirit and in truth. That's the only qualification.
Can we honestly not say though that we've been to places where it's distracting when something is not great?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we've been to places where it's distracting, but I think the distraction has been amped up by the fact that everyone's freaking out about the distraction.
Yeah.
But I would also say that the distraction in the first place has happened because that person has been devoting so much mental energy to stressing out.
Because I've certainly had services where I've very clearly heard from God, is this all it takes for you to switch off from me and switch on to something else? And I've been like, and this happened right at the very start of the service, and I went, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. And then it didn't bother me for the rest of it.
I have to get that into my spirit too. Yeah. On the other hand, I don't think it's as easy as black and white, because I can have an absolutely spirit-filled rehearsal, and then I am back into my human self, like I just want to run away and get out the thing. So I can go in reverse. And I hate it when I actually don't want to be in me.
Thank goodness that even when we are faithless, he is faithful. Yeah. So, conclusion, it's a high altitude summary of various resources, please remember that. But if this is a starting point, as with all the Foundry sessions, and if you've been to the Foundry before, you'll know that the basic rule is there's no homework, but if you found it useful, share it with one other person. That's all. We're doing the Jesus model, small numbers of people, etc. Then it becomes part of the community. It's not just one person's ideas. I've included a short bibliography, as I've said, if you want to explore the non-Bible resources. So to break it down, conflict is the opportunity for creativity. The difference between healthy and unhealthy conflict is our responses. Our responses are guided by our commitment to memorize healthy thought before the flashpoint. It is possible, nay, biblical, so rarely get the chance to use that in a sentence, to love someone you disagree with or self-differentiate. Recognize our own filters, and lastly, let go of your position to focus on the big principle and engage others in the application. And that footnote there, I think, is just worth putting. Jesus, think about it, Philippians 2:5-7, Jesus steps down from heaven to solve the big problem with the universe. We started off looking at Genesis. And what does he do? He enlists everyday people in the application, in the action of that mission with him. That blows my mind. Rather than getting conflict with him, he's like, let's work together on the solution to this. There's a bit that only I can do, 100%, but it's your job to now share it. It's beautiful.
Let this mind be in you.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah. So.
And then it goes on to this is 9 to 11.
You have to remind me there.
It finishes with that every knee shall bow.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Got me. Yeah. Yeah.
Verse 11.
Yep. Yeah. No, awesome. That's it.
And begin on the death in the death.
You memorised that.
I learned it when I was in Sunday school. Back in the days when you used to learn scripture in Sunday school.
You're flying circles around me there.
That was so good. We used to do Sunday school exams.
Yeah.
Wow.
Baptist Sunday school exams.
They're even harder than the normal ones.
Union.
Turn off the camera.
And I consistently got second in the state.
Thanks, Linka. Hope you enjoyed it.